Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of like structural precision.
Right. It's very much like engineering.
Exactly. I mean, you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points straight to the fracture.
Yeah, it's visible, it's binary, and it is completely isolated to the individual sitting right there on the examination table. We treat the body that contains the symptom.
Right, but what if the illness in a parent's body wasn't just, a biological failure? What if it was actually a direct reflection of how their grown child is living their life?
I mean, that is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Totally.
But it's exactly the framework laid out in today's source material. We're looking at a lecture transcript from September 2025 in Anyang, South Korea, and it challenges, basically everything we assume about individual autonomy, aging, and the very mechanics of health.
It really does. And the scenario presented in this lecture is just incredibly relatable, which I think makes the philosophy applied to it hit that much harder for you, the listener.
Oh, for sure.
So we are introduced to a 53-year-old woman, and she is asking a mentor for some life advice. And she paints this picture of a life that looks, honestly, endlessly dedicated.
Yeah, she spends her days caring for her sick parents.
Right, and she's raising her kids. And on top of all of that, she volunteers her time washing dishes and doing heavy chores at a local Buddhist temple.
Which, most observers would look at her daily schedule and just applaud her selflessness. I mean, she appears entirely devoted to serving others.
But internally, she is completely crumbling. She confesses to this mentor that she feels totally lost. I mean, she's 53, and she admits she has no idea what her true calling is.
She doesn't know her aptitude at all.
Exactly. She's just keeping her head down, doing this manual labor and caretaking, desperately hoping clarity will just eventually arrive. She's constantly in motion, but completely adrift.
And that intense feeling of being adrift, that's the real catalyst for the radical redefinition of filial piety we are exploring today.
Right. And in Korean culture, filial piety is known as hayo.
Yes. And we are going to examine the core relationship between a parent's physical health and a child's proper growth. We are looking at a deeply provocative claim from the source.
Which is wild.
It really is. The claim is that a child's personal, intellectual, and societal actualization is the ultimate literal cure for a parent's illness.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to understand why this 53-year-old woman feels so paralyzed, we first have to look at what her age actually represents in this specific philosophical framework.
Right, because society has basically completely failed to prepare her for the milestone of turning 50.
So how does the source define this age?
The framework introduces a concept known as Jicheonmayong. It translates roughly to knowing the mandate of heaven.
The mandate of heaven, that sounds heavy.
It is. Reaching 50 basically means you have hit the absolute deadline for becoming a true adult.
Wait, so meaning everything before that is essentially just a prologue?
Exactly. Your 20s are for basic academic and worldly education, and your 30s are for entering the workforce, building a foundation and making your initial mistakes.
Getting your feet wet.
Yeah. Then your 40s are for testing your philosophies and expanding your network.
So by the time you hit 50,
the grace period is completely over. You are no longer just gathering data. You are supposed to know exactly who you are, what your intellectual capacity is, and crucially, what specific leadership or contributory role you are meant to play in society.
Wow. But this woman, the 53-year-old, like so many adults today, she is entirely disconnected from that mandate. She has no idea what her role is.
And a major reason for this massive societal disconnect comes down to how we view parenting, according to the source.
Right, because we generally just think of raising children as a biological duty.
Yeah.
Keeping them safe, fed, maybe getting them into a reputable school.
Yeah, but in this framework, raising children is actually an intensive form of what they call social and family study.
Social and family study.
Yes. It frames the family unit as a microcosm of the broader economy. And applying the correct parenting rules is essential.
Because it's not one size fits all.
Not at all. Raising a child in a wealthy family requires a completely different approach than raising one in a middle class or lower income family.
We really have to look at what those different rules actually entail to see why getting them wrong causes such a systemic failure. Like, for a wealthy family, the source says the study involves teaching a child how to manage vast resources.
Right, building international networks, creating large-scale societal infrastructure.
Yeah, and if a wealthy family tries to raise their child with a survival-focused mindset of a low-income family, those massive resources are essentially paralyzed. They don't do anything for society.
Exactly. And then you have the middle class, which acts as the intellectual bridge.
The managers, the scholars, the professionals.
Yeah, their developmental study is all about utilizing knowledge to connect the foundational labor of the working class with the capital of the wealthy.
So if a middle-class family just focuses on, like, hoarding money instead of developing intellectual property and societal systems.
The entire economic bridge collapses. The system fails.
And for families facing economic hardship, the focus is supposed to be on grit, foundational skill building, creating the stability needed so the next generation can step onto that middle-class bridge.
The developmental requirements are wildly specific to the environment, but nobody is teaching these rules.
No one at all. And this is where the lecture delivers just a brutal critique of academia.
Oh, it goes right after them. The critique is aimed directly at the experts, the sociologists, the PhDs.
Yeah, because society grants these individuals advanced degrees, fellowships, research funding, all of this, specifically so they can study these complex class dynamics and basically write the societal user manual.
They're supposed to be guiding the population on how to navigate these familial and economic transitions.
Instead, they are using their intellectual credentials simply to secure their own economic survival.
Right, publishing obscure papers just to get tenure, rather than actively researching how a middle-class family should functionally operate in the modern world.
It is like we've been given a highly complex piece of software, human society, but the developers, these PhDs, never bothered to write the manual. So we're all just randomly clicking buttons, hoping the system doesn't crash.
That's fascinating here is how directly this missing manual explains the 53-year-old woman's dilemma at the temple.
Oh, so.
Well, she doesn't have a clear path for her intellectual or societal contribution because no one ever charted it for her. No one taught her the rules.
So she defaults to the only thing she knows how to do.
Exactly. Basic manual labor.
She is a grown woman, completely capable of complex thought, but she's scrubbing pots and pans.
She's treating immediate visual symptoms, dirty dishes, sick parents, because she lacks the education on how to cure the underlying disease of her own stagnant potential.
So if this woman is failing to execute her mandate of heaven, if she's just clicking buttons without the manual, who actually pays the price for that?
That is where the source takes a massive turn.
Right. The lecture suggests the penalty isn't just her internal feeling of being adrift. The penalty is exacted on the physical bodies of their parents.
We are moving from a critique of societal education straight into a radical theory of human biology.
It's wild.
Yeah.
The framework posits an undeniable physical tether between generations.
Yes. If a grown child is not growing properly, or if they are actively doing the wrong things in life, squandering their potential, or maybe pursuing selfish greed, nature intervenes.
Think of a family as a single integrated circuit board. The child is the processor, designed to run complex, valuable programs for the broader society.
And the parents act as the foundational battery.
Exactly. So if the processor starts running malicious, corrupt code, nature doesn't destroy the processor.
No, it simply throttles the battery to force a system reboot.
That is such a vivid way to picture it. And the corrupt politician is the perfect example used in the lecture to illustrate this mechanism.
Yeah, let's look at that. A politician is elected to serve the public, right? To use their intellect for righteous societal work.
But over time, they get derailed. They start manipulating public funds, taking bribes, basically using their organization purely for personal enrichment.
And the politician might think they're incredibly successful. I mean, they are winning elections, amassing wealth. They are totally oblivious to their own spiritual failure.
But nature monitors the circuit board. According to this framework, nature will strike the politician's parents with a severe illness.
The parents will just suddenly collapse. And the sheer mechanics of this intervention are highly practical.
Yeah, when a parent is rushed to the hospital with a life-threatening condition, the politician's entire world stalks.
They can't attend their backroom meetings. They can't focus on hiding their embezzled funds.
They have to drop everything and rush to the intensive care unit.
This raises an important question about the precision of this natural law. The lecture claims that nature's providence operates without even a 0.1 millimeter margin of error.
0.1 millimeters.
Meaning the parent's illness is engineered specifically to rip the child out of their corrupt environment. It pins them to a location where they have absolutely no choice but to pause.
Hold on, though. I can hear you, the listener, groaning right now. And frankly, I am too.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It really is.
Yeah.
Like, if my mom gets cancer, this philosophy says it's because I took the wrong job or haven't published enough papers. we have to address how incredibly heavy and massively guilt-inducing that is.
Oh, absolutely.
To tell a grieving child that their parent's suffering is a biological penalty for their own career choices sounds remarkably cruel.
It is arguably the heaviest concept in the framework, and it really requires a very careful synthesis of the underlying philosophy.
Right. We have to look closely at what the source is actually claiming here.
Exactly. It is not about malicious, punitive blame. It is not some cosmic punishment meant to shame the child. It operates purely as an emergency course correction.
Like an emergency brake.
Yes, an emergency brake. The universe recognizes that the child possesses immense value and potential, but they are heading down a path of absolute ruin.
So nature uses what it has.
Right. Nature utilizes the strongest possible biological tether, the innate love for a parent, to pull the child out of that toxic environment.
The illness puts them at the bedside so they can reflect, reassess, and realign their life.
It is a biological alarm bell signaling that the family's energetic output is fundamentally misaligned.
Okay, so if pulling a child away from their life to care for a sick parent is nature's emergency brake, then society's traditional idea of what makes a good child is completely backwards.
Oh, completely. We have entirely misunderstood the assignment of filial piety.
The framework completely dismantles the historical reality of Hayo.
It really does, because think about the traditional image of the ultimate devoted child.
It's someone who abandons their own career, their marriage, their personal growth, just to sit in a darkened room by their parents' bedside.
Massaging stiff shoulders day in and day out.
Yeah, and as the parent inevitably declines and becomes bedridden, the child spends their prime years cleaning up after them, managing their physical decay.
And historically, like during the Joseon dynasty, and honestly in many traditional cultures worldwide, this behavior was seen as the absolute pinnacle of morality.
Right. And if a child performed this grueling, life-halting sacrifice for a decade, it wasn't even considered enough.
No, only after perhaps 25 years of abandoning their own potential would society bestow a filial piety award upon them.
Which is just so grim. And the lecture forces us to look at the devastating psychological reality of this dynamic from the parent's perspective.
Yeah, think about being the parent in that situation.
You spend decades raising a child, hoping they will become a brilliant, impactful member of society.
And instead, your final years are spent watching them waste their intellectual prime, day after day, wiping up your feces.
The emotional toll is profound. The lecture describes this traditional dynamic as driving a large nail in the parent's heart.
Because no parent actually wants to be the anchor that drowns their child's future.
It is like jumping into the water to save a drowning person, but instead of actually swimming to shore, you both just decide to tread water in the freezing ocean for 25 years.
Wow, yes.
You're both technically surviving, but you are both suffering immensely, and neither of you is making any progress.
Because mutual sacrifice destroys potential. The traditional model of suffering alongside a sick parent is not a virtue at all.
According to this text, it's a generational tragedy that deprives society of the child's capable intellect. So if treading water just freezes you both, how do we actually swim to shore? I mean, how do we cure the illness and practice true filial piety?
Well, that requires a complete paradigm shift.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
True Hayo is radically redefined in this source as intellectual societal contribution.
Right. It states that true filial piety is achieved solely when a child becomes a highly respected, excellent person doing valuable work for the broader world.
The mechanism behind this relies on what the framework calls righteous energy.
Righteous energy. And when a grown child utilizes their intellect to solve societal problems, mentor others, or build valuable systems, they generate a massive amount of this positive energy.
And because of that biological and spiritual tether we discussed earlier, that energy actually flows upward.
Yes. It literally acts as an energetic shield for the parents' immune systems.
Which leads to the absolute boldest claim in the entire lecture, that if a child is doing great work and is truly respected by society, their parents will absolutely never get sick.
Period. And if the parents are already suffering from an illness, the moment the child finds their righteous path, the moment they stop treading water and begin applying their intellect to society, the universe will miraculously restore the parent's health.
The biological alarm bell just turns off because the emergency course correction was successful.
Exactly. Now, looking at the mentor's actual advice to the 53-year-old woman in the text, it's pretty ruthless.
Oh, he does not hold back.
No. He doesn't tell her to pray harder or wash dishes with more mindfulness.
He dissects her psychological motivations.
He points out that her constant volunteering at the temple isn't actually humility.
Right. It's an escape.
She is hiding among the dirty dishes because she is deeply frustrated and embarrassed that her children didn't get into elite colleges.
She feels like a failure in her own family studies, so she is just retreating from the intellectual challenge of life entirely.
He essentially tells her to get out of the kitchen.
Yeah, he's like, you are a valuable human being meant for higher pursuits. He advises her that if she truly wants to heal her sick parents, she must aggressively pursue her own intellectual growth.
He even states that if she discovers a path of truly important societal work, she should immediately hire a nanny or a tutor to handle her remaining childcare duties.
She has to stop defaulting to manual labor, stand tall, and become a person society actually respects.
Because that is the only valid prescription for her parents' recovery.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the process of finding that path begins with a very specific act of humility, doesn't it?
It does. Whether you are seeking guidance at a Buddhist temple, a church, or simply looking out at the universe, the very first step is acknowledging your own ignorance.
You have to admit you've been clicking buttons without the manual.
Yeah, you have to say, I didn't know what it meant to be 50. I didn't know how to fulfill my societal role.
And acknowledging that ignorance is what invites the universe to step in.
Right. When you genuinely commit to personal growth and societal contribution, the framework dictates that the universe will restore your parents' physical energy.
Granting you the freedom to pursue your mandate without being anchored to a hospital bed. We have covered a massive amount of philosophical ground today.
We really have.
We explored the failure of our academic institutions to provide a functional manual for adulthood. We dug into the concept of Jishan Mayam, the mandate to step into societal leadership by age 50.
And we examined the startling proposition that a parent's illness is a biological emergency brake designed to pull a lost child out of a ruinous life path.
And finally, we dismantled the tragic history of traditional filial piety, replacing it with the empowering reality that living a brilliant, impactful life is the absolute highest form of caring for your family.
It is quite the journey.
It is. So what does this all mean for you, listening to this?
Good question.
The next time you feel a pang of guilt for focusing on your own education, maybe pushing for that massive career leap, or prioritizing your intellectual growth instead of hovering over your family's every immediate domestic need, remember this framework.
Yeah, remember that your personal actualization, your success, and the righteous energy you generate for society might be the exact protective shield your family's biology requires.
By becoming the best, most impactful version of yourself, you are administering the ultimate preventative medicine.
It really forces a complete reevaluation of what we consider to be self-serving.
How so?
Well, if our societal contribution and intellectual fulfillment are directly tethered to the cellular health of the people who raised us, then self-actualization isn't a selfish act at all.
Not even a little bit.
It makes you wonder what other deeply personal pursuits of knowledge, ambition, or career might actually be the most profound literal acts of love we can ever offer our families.